North Korea appears to have stopped its noise broadcast toward South Korea as of Thursday, less than a day after the South shut off its loudspeaker broadcast the previous day, as part of efforts to ease the tensions between the two Koreas. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is ready and open to dialogue with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, while acknowledging reports that the North Korean side repeatedly rejected Trump's letter to Kim. President Jae-myung continues to put emphasis on public safety by making a surprise visit to the site of the October 29 Itaewon disaster, as well as the Han River Flood Control Center ahead of the early monsoon season. Good evening. Peaceful silence is back in the border areas between the two Koreas. Following South Korea's suspension of propaganda broadcast on Wednesday, the North followed suit the next day. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung starts us off.
North Korea's first response to the new South Korean administration's move has been to mutually reduce tensions. Pyongyang appears to have paused its broadcasts of loud noises towards South Korea on Thursday, following South Korea's suspension of loudspeaker messages the day before. According to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the South Korean military has not detected any broadcasts since late last night, though it needs to see if the pause will continue.
There are no areas where we can currently hear the broadcast, though it stopped late last night, and there were certainly no broadcasts early this morning or at dawn. It is uncertain whether this will continue in the afternoon. We're keeping a close eye on the situation.
This follows the South Korean military's move to halt loudspeaker broadcasts against the North in border areas the day before, in accordance with President Lee's order.
President Lee Jae-myung recently made this decision as a proactive measure to ease tensions, given the absence of any significant provocations from North Korea. This action is aimed at elevating the military standoff between the two Koreas and opening the way for restoring mutual trust.
The halt came for the first time in a year since the former administration resumed the broadcast last June, for the first time in 6 years, in response to North Korea flying trash-filled balloons across the border. For now, the JC has said there are no changes to scheduled plans to conduct training in border areas. With the first step taken to allay inter-Korean tensions, eyes are on whether this could serve as a momentum for President Lee to push his presidential campaign pledge, reversing the full suspension of the September 19th inter-Korean military agreement. An expert says it won't be easy to do it quickly.
If things develop further, the restoration of inter-Korean communication and liaison channels could pave the way for dialogue. However, I believe there are still many obstacles to fully restoring the September 19 military agreement.
As restoring the agreement is something that cannot be done unilaterally or preemptively, the expert added it should be pushed forward in a planned manner. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Also on Thursday, President Jae-myung pledged to make efforts to quickly restore dialogue channels with North Korea. In a statement delivered by his Political Affairs Secretary on the 25th anniversary of the 2000 Inter-Korean Summit, he said he will end the exhausting hostilities and restore dialogue and cooperation with Pyongyang. He added that his administration will do everything it can to build a peaceful, cooperative, and thriving Korean peninsula. U.S. President Donald Trump may be looking to reopen talks with North Korea, but Pyongyang isn't picking up. A new report says the regime rejected a letter sent by Trump to the leader Kim Jong-un. Our correspondent Kim Jong-sil has the story.
A relationship once hailed as groundbreaking is back in the headlines. President Trump reportedly sent a letter to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, hoping to revive stalled dialogue. According to NK News on Wednesday, citing a high-level source, multiple in-person delivery attempts to North Korean diplomats at the United Nations were made, but each time they bluntly refused to accept it. Asked about the matter, the White House did not deny the report.
The president remains receptive to correspondence with Kim Jong-un, and he'd like to see the progress that was made at that summit in Singapore. As for specific correspondence, I'll leave that to the president to answer.
Analysts say North Korea's refusal may reflect a deeper dissatisfaction with Washington's unchanged stance toward Pyongyang.
North Korea likely remains deeply skeptical of exchanging personal letters when there's been no real change in what it sees as a hostile U.S. policy. For Kim Jong-un, rejecting Trump's letter also signals that his distrust of Trump still runs deep.
At the same time, Pyongyang appears to be doubling down on its ties with Moscow.
North Korea is gaining significantly from its cooperation with Russia and moving toward a deeper strategic relationship. Engaging in close talks with the U.S. now could send the wrong signal to Moscow. So for Pyongyang, there's little incentive to accept Trump's letter.
Experts say Pyongyang likely hasn't forgotten that some past letter exchanges were made public during Trump's first term, something the North might have viewed as both risky and disrespectful. With Trump's limited time in office, analysts say North Korea is unlikely to engage with the U.S. unless Washington signals a clear policy shift, possibly including sanctions relief or other long-sought concessions. For now, the letter remains unopened, and the future of U.S.-North Korea dialogue is just as sealed. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has sent a congratulatory letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin in honor of Russia Day. According to the North state-run Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, in the letter, Kim called Russia a brotherly nation and said Pyongyang and Moscow share an unbreakable comrade-in-arms relationship. The letter was delivered by North Korean ambassador to Russia, Shin Hong-chul, to Russia's foreign ministry to mark Russia Day on June 12th, a national holiday marking the formation of the Russian Federation. While North Korea's state media had traditionally released Kim's Russia Day letter without context since last year, the KCNA has also reported on the delivery process before publishing the full text. South Korea's unification ministry said it doesn't see any particular significance in the latest exchange. It was just a routine message sent annually. President Jae-myung visited a local flood control center today ahead of the upcoming rainy season, putting emphasis on safety. At the same time, the new leader, who's just in his second week in office, has been bolstering communication with Parliament and the press throughout the week. Our senior top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Appearing in a yellow civil defense uniform, South Korea's new president was at a flood control center of the Hangang River in Seoul on Thursday to check readiness as the nation braces for the summer rainy season.
우리 국민들의 생명과 안전, 재산의 피해를 막는 것이 가장 중요하다. 잘 먹고 잘 사는 문제, 민생의 문제도 중요하지만 그것보다 가장 중요한 일은 국민들의 생명과 안전을 지키는 일이라는.
Present at the meeting were related officials, where he called for an overhaul of flood-prone areas, as well as the flood warning system. He went on to emphasize the responsibility of the officials in charge of public safety, as he vowed to better empower them and improve compensation. Also in line with this, President Jae-myung suddenly stopped by the alleyway in Seoul's Itaewon neighborhood, where the disastrous crowd crush claimed the lives of more than 150 people around 3 years ago. He laid flowers and observed a moment of silence at Memorial Alley. On his way back to the office, he spoke with nearby merchants, asking them how their businesses were doing. Other than focusing on people's livelihoods during his second week in office, the new president has made a move to bolster communication with Parliament. East Secretary for Political Affairs, Woo Sang-ho, paid a visit to the National Assembly for the third straight day on Thursday to meet the leadership of political parties, underscoring the need for cooperation across the aisle. It's taken as the president demonstrating his recognition of them as partners in charge of state affairs. Also conspicuous to the press corps covering the president was Yi unexpectedly stopping by at a cafeteria at the top office to have lunch and coffee with reporters in a casual setting for 3 days in a row this week. It's widely seen as a move to bolster communication with the press at the early stage of his presidency. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
President Yi also continues to engage with his foreign counterparts, today holding phone calls with the leaders of Australia and Vietnam. Our Presidential Office correspondent Song Yoo-jin has more.
It was a busy day of diplomacy for President Lee Jae-myung on Thursday, holding phone calls with the leaders of two of South Korea's comprehensive strategic partners. In the afternoon, President Lee spoke with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. According to the presidential office, the pledge to strengthen cooperation in national defense, clean energy, and critical minerals, building on the long-standing trust and solidarity forged since Australia's participation in the Korean War in the 1950s. They also discussed working together to promote peace on the Korean Peninsula and to achieve meaningful progress on the North Korean nuclear issue. Cooperation for the successful hosting of the 2025 APEC summit in Gyeongju City was mentioned as well, as both countries are founding members of the regional forum. Both sides agreed to hold in-person talks to discuss concrete ways. Earlier in the day, the South Korean leader spoke with Vietnamese President Luong Quoc. Similarly, their focus was on further developing their partnership.
The two leaders agreed to expand and deepen bilateral cooperation in strategic sectors such as high-speed rail and nuclear energy.
President Yi requested Vietnam's continued interest and support for Korean companies operating there, to which President Quoc responded positively. Quoc also invited Yi to Vietnam, to which he said he looks forward to in-depth discussions to strengthen bilateral ties during his visit. So these are President Yi's fifth and sixth phone conversations with world leaders since taking office last Wednesday. His diplomatic efforts continue ahead of next week's G7 summit in Canada, where he's expected to meet several of the leaders he spoke to face-to-face. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Amid the flurry of first phone calls and preparations for President Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic debut at the G7, it seems South Korea's bureaucracy is quickly moving to support the new administration's so-called pragmatic diplomacy. Now, even without a new foreign minister having been named. Our Oh Soo-young tells us more.
South Korea's new diplomatic doctrine under President Lee Jae-myung is quickly taking shape, and pragmatism is the key word. Since his electoral campaign, Lee has repeatedly emphasized that while the Korea-US alliance remains the foundation of Seoul's foreign policy, he intends to pursue a broader, more flexible diplomatic course that does not shy away from engagement with China and Russia. Analysts say Lee's approach marks a notable shift from the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government's diplomacy, which aligned with former President Joe Biden's value-based cooperation with allies. Legislator Kim Jun-young, a former advisor to Moon Jae-in and former head of the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, frames it this way.
Yoon Suk-yeol said always the value-based diplomacy. But in fact, it is like almost like a Cold War kind of ideological camp. Let's say US, Korea, Japan is a good side. And North Korea, China, and Iran, Russia, these are, so divided into two words, so that means ideological war. By saying pragmatism, he's trying to go for national interest rather than ideological right and wrong things.
Pragmatism is also needed to reflect the shifting geopolitical reality. With the Trump administration's transactional approach to alliances resurfacing, South Korea faces hard bargaining over defense cost sharing, trade, and industrial policy.
His target is more like old friends and allies. And by saying that, he said a tariff. So that means now is a payback time. Mm-hmm. So you should pay tariff to make trade relation more fair. And he wants to correct security umbrella. So it's not free anymore. So these are, of course, not just Korean, other allies in the whole world. But most upgraded or highest level of alliance is Korea, Japan, and NATO.
To navigate such shifting dynamics, the Yi administration is signaling its desire to widen diplomatic options. In her inauguration speech on Wednesday, newly appointed Second Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jin-ah emphasized collaboration with diverse players beyond Seoul's traditional partners. She said this would help reduce dependence on specific countries and contribute to securing autonomy and flexibility in Korea's diplomacy. With immediate challenges to address, the Yi administration this week appointed the first and second deputy foreign ministers before it names a new foreign minister, which requires parliamentary approval. This, according to experts, signals the Yi administration's intention to swiftly coordinate and initiate policy in accordance with the pragmatic diplomacy mantra ahead of impending negotiations with the US and global engagements, including at the G7 summit starting June 15. 오수영, Arirang News.
And now, following President Jae-myung's election win last week, one of the biggest talking points is whether the government is going to come up with a supplementary budget. With the current economic situation, how much spending by the government is feasible and necessary is a question, but President Yi has been adamant about spending more. We have our economic correspondent Kim Do-yeon in studio to tell us more details. Good evening, Do-yeon.
Good to be here.
So, Do-yeon, since a supplementary budget is coming, it's not a question anymore.
That's right, Dami. First, it's been a bit more than a week, and Yi has been focusing on the economy, as we've seen. He, in fact, signed his first executive order to kick off an emergency economic response task force and met with them twice already. On top of this, his first public appearance outside of the presidential office was his visit to the Korea Exchange yesterday. Now, let's listen to his acceptance speech and see how he's trying to boost the economy.
민생 회복과 경제 살리기부터 시작하겠습니다. 불황과 일전을 치른다는 각오로 비상경제 대응 TF를 곧바로 지금 즉시 가동하겠습니다. 국가 재정을 마중물로 삼아 경제 선순환을 되살리겠습니다.
Now notice he says the nation's finances. So we know the government spending will increase. Before we get to it though, let's also break down where the economy stands right now as Yi called the current situation a recession, looking at the most recent data. Now this comes against the backdrop of South Korea's economy struggling, with the Korea Development Institute labeling the current situation subdued. For the first quarter, the nation's economy shrank. This report says the country's gross domestic product from January to March shrank by 0.2% on quarter, unchanged from an estimate in April. Sectors like construction and services are struggling especially.
You know, Do-yeon, if there is an extra budget to tackle this, what can we expect? I mean, we can expect a speedy passing of the budget bill as expected, right?
That's right, Dami. First and foremost, unlike the previous government, Lee Jae-myung administration has the backing of the parliament. Lawmakers from the DP are calling for at least 20 trillion won or 14.5 billion US dollars. Let's take a listen to the then floor leader of the DP addressing this.
We'll introduce a supplementary budget to ease the burden on people's daily lives and deliver policies that make a real difference. At the same time, we won't stop investing in South Korea's future.
The primary focus, just because this will affect everyone, seems to be boosting domestic spending. Now, to achieve this, Yi has been for some time now calling for a universal cash payout for 250,000 Korean won for everyone. This could be a form of local currency as well. Some lawmakers also call for a selective distribution. Now, this is something that will help the service sector, especially. We saw a drop in jobs in the hotels and restaurant sector for the first time in 15 months, and the biggest drop since COVID-19. But domestic spending could help this.
Providing payments in the form of local currency can help boost the regional economy. So we could see a temporary increase in spending, particularly in sectors like services, lodging, and dining, which may lead to a slight uptick in employment.
Doyeon, I wouldn't mind the universal cash payout, but there are concerns that could lead to inflation if some sort of cash is distributed.
That's right. That's probably the biggest concern for some of the opposing lawmakers. However, the Bank of Korea also agrees that boosting domestic spending is more urgent and a speedy supplementary budget is needed. On top of this, even with the second supplementary budget of the year, there won't be much of an impact on inflation. The bank did refrain from saying the right amount of money for the budget, but it did warn, of course, that too much will hurt the nation's economy later. This came through a written statement to a liberal lawmaker's question today.
Right now, the supplementary budget isn't just about this. It'll also deal with certain industries like his pledge to before, right?
That's right. There are certain industries that need help. One of the most struggling industries right now is the construction sector. It has been shrinking for some time. Take a listen to an expert on why it's so important to support this sector.
In construction, every 1 billion won in revenue creates around 12 jobs. It's an industry where working class people, those who rely on labor to make a living, benefit the most.
In addition, there needs to be investments made to ensure that industries struggling from U.S. tariffs can survive the hard times. This includes steel and automakers. Plus, sectors like AI need consistent development, and funds could be used to make sure the nation's strategic industries don't lag behind.
Indeed. Doyeon, thank you so much for coming in today. I'll see you around.
Thank you for having me.
The rainy season started on Jeju Island already today. It's a week earlier than usual and the third earliest rainy season ever. It will start to rain in Jeollanam-do province and Gyeongsang-nam-do province by dawn tomorrow. By the end of the day, rain will spread to the southern parts of the Chungcheong-do provinces. As for the amount of rainfall, about 150 millimeters of strong rain is expected in Jeju Island and more than 200 millimeters in the mountainous areas. Some areas will have rain pouring at 20 to 40 millimeters per hour at some point. Heavy rain of more than 100 millimeters is forecast around the south coast and 5 to 40 millimeters in the Chungcheong-do provinces. Seoul, Daejeon, Daegu, Busan, and Jeju will start off at 19 degrees Celsius. Daily highs will move up to 30 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 28 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Rain will continue until Monday across the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.